So, Steve, it's so nice to be here with you today. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to be part of our new World War II Experts and Authors series.
It's
And
my pleasure, Katie.
yeah, and again, you're not just any World War II author and expert. You've known Nick for a while now, and have a great new book out, and also have been so supportive of our forthcoming book. So thank you.
My
GIG
pleasure.
Men is going to be really exciting to talk about. So without further ado, we can just jump right in, and love to hear from you. You know, we've read the book, but for those who haven't, let's hear the quick elevator pitch for what the story is, or the stories that you share in GIG Men.
So the elevator pitch is in 1944, the FBI sent about 18 special agents to Europe to hunt down Americans who had committed treason by collaborating with the Nazis or the Italian fascists. Only one of these agents had ever had any military training at all, but they were to be embedded with U.S. Army units because the war was ongoing.
Mhm.
So they all had to go to sort of army boot camp before they went over. It was an interesting story because several of the people that they were looking for were known propagandists, Americans who had done radio programs, radio propaganda or print propaganda for the Nazis or the Italian fascists. But others were just everyday Americans who had stayed in Axis occupied territory once the Germans or the Italian fascists took over and ended up collaborating in various ways. Some through propaganda, some through business deals, and some were more romantically involved, shall we say.
Mhm.
So the book is kind of a look at a lesser known aspect of World War II, and that's one of the things that I like to do as a writer is to find smaller stories about the war, and I write almost exclusively about World War II in my books. To find a small group of people or even an individual whose actions during the war sort of illustrate a larger story or a larger message from the conflict. And I was really attracted to this story because it's kind of a combination of military history, police procedural, and it's a comment in various ways on current times about how people can be surprisingly willing to act against their own nation in times of conflict.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about this underreported role that the FBI really plays? We're talking about traitors, treason, collaborationists. What were some of the things that came up that you learned in the process?
Well, I knew just the barest basics about this. For example, Ezra Pound, the renowned American poet, had lived in Europe really since the mid-20s. He'd ended up in fascist Italy and became a huge fan of the Italian fascists to the
And
point
this is
where,
quite a famous case of the Ezra
oh yeah,
Pound particular, yes.
yeah, and I had heard that, but I'd not heard really about. There were other journalists, mainly American journalists who had worked in Europe. They'd
Right.
been foreign correspondents or whatever, who in the same way had been writing about Nazi Germany, for example, up until 1941. American was neutral in the war until after Pearl Harbor. So many of these reporters stayed in Europe after the German conquest of France, for example, in 1940, and their writing subtly changed from being sort of journalism to being propaganda for the Nazis. Jane Anderson was one of them. I mean, there were basically eight people, and all eight of those people, these journalists who'd done radio propaganda, I sort of knew about them, but I didn't know their actual stories. So when I started digging into this, you find out that it was way worse than I had known. And then a complete different set of people were the Americans, for example, in German-occupied France, who collaborated big time with the Nazis, so far as to, socialize with them, to do business with them. And in the case of several well-known American women, to be romantically involved with senior Nazis, including the Gestapo chief of Paris and so on. And then there was a third subset. If you will remember the excellent TV show Band of Brothers,
Hmm.
in one of the episodes, there is a scene where an American soldier stops to talk with a German POW and is flabbergasted to find out the German's from Portland, Oregon. Th that was not uncommon in World War II for these gentlemen, not just gentlemen, but these people were called Volksdeutschers,
Yes.
meaning they were either born in Germany and taken to the United States or other countries and raised in that country. And then when Hitler came to power, their families answered the call.
Yeah.
Well, that was very true, but the records on actually finding those people were very scarce. A lot of the records you can you can understand why
Yes. Not a
were
bit of
destroyed
pride.
after. Exactly. People didn't want to have it known, but I was able to find several cases, which I document in the book,
Yes.
of American citizens who either willingly or willingly were forced to serve in the Wehrmacht or the Luftwaffe, and were investigated by these FBI agents after the liberation of France. The FBI teams moved into newly liberated Germany,
Right.
where they investigated a lot of those people. So there were ins and outs of the story that I really hadn't known that much about. But by going through the records, I was able to really kind of flesh out the story. I will say one thing, though, Katie. One of the things that I discovered in writing this book, obviously I researched the National Archives here in the States. I researched the UK archives,
Mhm.
German, French. The records in the U.S. National Archives, for the most part, had been declassified
Sure.
in the 50s and 60s.
France, not so much.
Yeah, but there are still records in the UK National Archive, in the US National Archives that are not only classified, they've been so redacted that, for example, one piece of paper I got was completely redacted except for the title of the paper. And I found myself wondering why, 80 some odd years after the end of the war, why are these things still classified? And then I found out that a lot of the same exact records are held by the UK National Archives, and they're not classified and they're not redacted. So by comparing these two documents, I was able to find out what they said. So that was interesting. I really, it's one of those sleuthing things that those of us who enjoy research really kind of get overly excited about.
Oh, and you can only hope that someone releases something, sort of unintentionally sends you a file, which does happen too. These archives are troves that if you leaf through, things are fair game. Sometimes you just no one's leafed through. Uh, did you find that the digitization of the archives was, I know in Q, for example, it's sort of hit or miss if something's digitized and you can get a lot from going there. What was your experience with, needing to be there on the ground?
Yeah, I actually found the collections at Q to be great in the sense of what the stuff that I needed to access.
I'm not.
Much of it, if it hadn't already been digitized, they have
They would do it for you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Very nominal. Yeah.
it's amazing. They're very very good at helping out that way. A lot of the records at the U.S. National Archives, excuse me, I actually went, photographed the individual documents
Yeah.
myself and used them that way. In France, the French archives for the World War II period are complete in many ways.
And
I
in
do
many
not,
places.
and in many places all over France. And I'm discovering that now as I'm working on a new project. But it really helps to speak French, which I don't. My wife is fluent in French. Plus, I have a good friend and fellow reporter who's lived in France for 30 years, Ellen Hampton,
Ah,
who
yes, we share a French
yeah,
resource, an amazing researcher writer in
oh,
Ellen.
she's amazing.
Oh, and you're
And
the source of Ellen coming into our lives. Thank you. Nick and I certainly relied on Ellen, and her book about doctors and the resistance is
oh,
really interesting too.
it's amazing. And
Yeah.
you know, when we were in France, she was not only a good friend and knew some great restaurants,
Yeah.
but introduced us to the point where my wife and I got to go for one of my books up onto the top of the Hotel des Invalides, the big gold dome that's,
Sure.
we didn't go on the top of the dome, but on the support of it, which is 100 and some odd feet off the ground. So it was unique, and she's a wonderful resource.
Okay, well, that's a good note to when I go to France this summer, give Ellen a call and take her to lunch.
Yeah,
Uh,
really.
yeah, well, Steve, we could talk all day, but I want people to also check out GIG Men and, of course, your other books. But I, of course, have to ask my next question, the topic of this series, which what is one or two pieces of World War II related media that you would recommend to Americans today?
That is a huge question. I've been thinking about one of the most seminal books that I ever read that got me into World War II. I read when I was a teenager, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo by Ted Lawson. And part of the reason I read it is because my father, I grew up in California, my father is an electrician, and he actually ended up wiring Ted Lawson's house. And I had seen the movie with Van Johnson. I mean, this is way before most people's time, but it's a great movie about the real attack, the Doolittle raid on Japan. And I got to talking with Ted Lawson, who,
By virtue of your father being the electrician.
yeah, I mean, I went with him to work, and he gave me a signed copy of the book.
Huh.
It's a great story about a real event, and it does what I try to do in my books. It takes a relatively small group of people in most of the book. It's basically Ted Lawson and his crew and what happens to them when they crash land in China after the raid. And it tells a bigger story about one of the most important aspects of the early part of World War II. And plus, Ted Lawson, who's obviously been gone now for many years, was just a fascinating guy who was willing to talk to a young teenager who just kept asking questions. And I would strongly urge people who, even if you don't know anything about World War II, it's a very good book, very well done, and then you can see the movie, which is also quite good.
Well, this is great because I admittedly have not read it, but I can relate a little bit in that Hiroshima by John Hersey, obviously other side of the war, but was a book
Right.
that I read in high school and was just, same thing where it's micro to macro and you're thinking about, human stories and then global implications of all of this conflict. And I think it's one of the more powerful ways to have you not experienced the war yourself. And obviously you're a veteran and have different perspectives on more modern conflict, but to
Yeah.
really connect to the human experience. So I'm
Well,
glad that you flagged that, and I'm going to read it.
it's a great book, and I will add one thing, Katie. When I was a soldier, I was very seriously hurt and spent a lot of time in Army hospitals in California because that's where I was medevac
Yeah.
back to. And this was before the internet, and there wasn't television in the uh, hospital. So I ended up reading a lot. And there was this library lady who came around, with a cart with books on it. And
Yeah.
for some reason, this was an Army hospital, but all the books they had seemed to be about the Marines in the Pacific. So I
Hmm.
also read
That
things
seems like a
like,
cruel joke.
yeah, it was,
If you know anything
uh,
about Marines and Army, and
oh, I know some great Marine jokes. My brother-in-law is a Marine.
oh, good. That
Uh,
could be our next question then.
Yeah, but I read Helmet for My Pillow with the Old Breed, a lot of really good stuff. And my father was in the Army in the Pacific, and my uncles were all in the Navy in the Pacific. So I had a lot of time with nothing else to do except lay in a bed uh, to really read all of the classics. That's why it would be very difficult for me to pick out, like one book. And it's odd that I end up writing mostly about the European theater. So.
It's maybe you had had the whole full breadth of the Pacific, but also how cruel that they just had books about Marines in the Pacific at an
Yeah,
Army
it
hospital. So
must have been an arcane marine plot,
maybe it was supposed to make you feel better. I don't know, perspective, but well, thank you for sharing that, and again for your service and also what you've provided and really for me, I read a lot about World War II, yet knew very little about this FBI role and sort of after the war what that looked like. So thank you.
My
And
pleasure.